we're running a little bit late, so I'll try to run through this very quickly. Graham, thank you so much for your presentation. It was honestly information gold, and that was the perspective from an examiner's point of view, and I'll give you a little bit of a perspective from a candidate's point of view. So going through the process, I kind of like developed this 5-step framework to preparing the supporting material. So the first point is starting with the matrix and the project selection that Graham talked about how important that is. So we talk a little bit about that. Then how to identify the gaps that you have in your matrix. Then how to produce new material to fill these gaps. How to cover the criteria several times. And how to build a strong navigation system. Sorry, just a second, I want to... Yeah, perfect, that's in presentation mode. So starting with the matrix and the project selection. This is absolutely crucial. The first time I took the exam, I didn't pay much attention to the matrix. I honestly treated it as one of those paperworky things that I needed to fill in and just to get my application in as soon as possible. Obviously, that was a mistake and that did not go down well. The matrix holds the key to selecting the right projects. And second, it's the, as Graham said, it's the navigating system that the jury are going to use to navigate your work. So what's the comparative matrix? Just a little bit of a reminder. It is indeed a form, but if you need to think of it more like as a brief for the whole portfolio. And also it's the navigation system for the jury to navigate your work very quickly. And it's an opportunity for you to summarize how you think you met those criteria. And if you've noticed, in the beginning of the form, there is actually a word count. And you need to state your word count. And if that tells you anything, is that out of all the written work that you're going to submit for the exam, this is the most likely written work that the jury are going to read. And that's absolutely crucial. That means that you really need to sell your work. This is your chance, the first impression, you need to sell your work. So basically, how I would think of it as an exhaustive executive summary of your portfolio. It needs to include everything. And that's difficult to do in the word count, I have to say. So the other question is, and we were talking about that just now, how many projects should I select? And I get asked this question quite a lot. And the honest answer is that it depends. On the ARB website, you can find some indication. So basically, they are saying that you are expected to provide at least 2 holistic design projects to demonstrate presentations using a variety of media, etc. So at least 2 holistic projects. But they're also saying, be careful not to use too many projects, as this will make it very difficult for the examiners to carefully consider the material in the allotted time of 1 hour. This is outdated, as Graham said, it's 90 minutes. Equally, you should not rely on only 1 or 2 projects. Whilst it is possible to cover all of the criteria with a single comprehensive project, it is a risky strategy, as Graham said, and the matrix suggests a maximum of 8 projects, which you might wish to use as a guideline. So this is where the 8 projects are suggested. But what does this mean? Does this mean that you need to submit 8 projects? Does this mean that 2 projects are enough? It could be a little bit confusing. But the first clue is in the comparative matrix as suggested. And it gives you an indication of 8 projects, fine. But the question you need to ask yourself is, if you were to submit 8 projects, do you think that you can go in depth enough in some of these projects and cover the whole story of your project? This is the challenge. And it's very hard if you submit 8 projects to demonstrate that journey for a few of them. And as Graham said, the guideline is between 60 and 80 pages, so you're very limited in terms of space that you have to present your material. The second question that you need to ask yourself, which is the honest question, is it really necessary to submit 8 projects, or am I just creating more work for myself, basically? And to answer these questions, the 3 first criteria give you, a good indication. And if you read the first criteria, GC 1.1, it says that you need to prepare and present building design projects of diverse scale, complexity, and type in a variety of contexts, using a range of media, etc. And understand the constructional and structural systems, the environmental strategies, and the regulatory requirements that apply to the design and the construction of a comprehensive design project. So, for me, how many projects you need to select, it depends on your background. It depends on how much work you have. It depends on the kind of projects you did previously. It depends on how much information you have. But it's a sweet spot that you need to find. And for me, that sweet spot was 6 projects. And my reasoning was that, I'd rather show 6 projects and go much in detail in some of them to actually show the whole journey than submit 8 projects and not go in much detail in some of them. So to give you an example of the projects that I submitted for the exam, I had the Institute of Traditional Woodworking, which was a project based in Marrakesh, but it was in quite a complex site that was between the old city and the new city, and it was quite a big urban scale. The project was in a big section of the city that had a very particular context that needed to be approached in a particular way. Then I submitted a house, and it was an artist house in Rabat. And to just give you an idea of the scale, I made sure that I put the area of each project in the first page to introduce the project, and that shows that range of scale that they're looking for. So the house was quite smaller than the school. Then I presented my thesis, which was the Sustainable Fabric Factory. Also, it was in Marrakesh, but it was a completely different context than this one, because it was in the industrial area of Marrakesh. Then I presented a project from work, and that was Evesham Baptist Church, and that was a church in Evesham. I also presented a house, which was my case study, but then again, 2 houses, but this one was in a particular urban context in Rabat in Morocco, and this one was in a conservation area in a little village near Nottingham, so it was a completely different context. And finally, the 6 projects that I presented were my part 3 assignments, and those were of various scale. Those talked about specific projects of various scales and in different parts of the country. So the first one was education, residential, industrial, community, residential again, and then the other one was various. And that is about 4 sectors, which I believed gave that variety of briefs that the jury was looking for. And then finally, the location of each project is quite important to state that in the submission. So how do you actually select these projects when you're starting to think about it? It can be, I did this and I did that, and this project would be great, and this one also would be great, and I don't know what to select. And it's as simple as creating an Excel sheet. And what I did is that I created a long Excel sheet with all of the 11 criteria and with all of the sub-criteria, and then I mapped my projects against them, and then I did that assessment before even doing, looking at the matrix, and I just put this assessment. Does this satisfy the criteria? Yes, no, yes, no. And you can come up with your own system, but I highlighted the criteria where I thought, I'm not really convinced, I need to produce more material. And, maybe put 8 projects in your Excel file and do the assessment and see what projects meet the most criteria, or where you could add some more material that will cover those criteria. So just to show an example, I made sure that the criteria were covered several times. So I'll put the number of how many times I think I meet the criteria, and then in a little caption there it says satisfied, yes or no. So the second one is identifying the gaps. So to give you an example, this is the matrix that I submitted in my first unsuccessful application. And as you can see, there are a lot of criteria that were only covered once. And as Graham said, that's a big mistake. So these are gaps. All of these are gaps, because it's such a risky move to only cover one criteria once, and with professional work rather than with academic. So I'll talk a little bit about that in a sec. So how do you produce, so what is a gap? Either you haven't covered the criteria, obviously, or you've covered it only once, or maybe you've covered it a few times, but you're not really convinced. You don't think that the evidence is strong enough. So that's a gap. So how to produce new material to fill the gaps? So I'll just show you an example of this artist house that I presented. And just to show you, basically this is how little information I had. I had these 2 pages on the artist house. But I wanted to use this project to cover GC3, which relate to the knowledge of the fine arts as an influence on the quality of architectural design. And the project that was that I got the inspiration from, well, the project was inspired by a painting. So I wanted to use that, and I wanted to show how painting can be used as a medium to explore form and movement, a bit like what Zaha Hadid is famously known for. So in order to fill these gaps efficiently, you need to ask yourself a few questions. What do I need to show? What material do I already have that I can work with? Or what material is widely available that I can analyze or refer to? How can it look good with minimum effort? We're all very busy, and a lot of us, have only the weekends to produce this extra information. A lot of us are, in full-time work. How can I do this efficiently? How can I do this quickly? And the bonus is, how can I cover more than one criterion with this extra work? If I'm going to sit down on a Saturday afternoon and produce extra work, can I produce extra work that will cover several criteria? And the answer to this question in this particular example is, yes, what do I need to show? I need to show how the theories, practices, and technologies of the arts influence architectural design, so GC 3.1. What material do I already have? I didn't have anything, so what material is widely available that I can analyze or refer to? Zaha Hadid's painting and approach, that's widely available online, and that's something that I can just grab and analyze. How can it look good with minimum effort? Well, one idea is that I can sketch on them manually or with a digital tablet and add some notes using Photoshop to just analyze this. And can you cover more than one criterion with this extra work? Yes, I can also cover another one. So just to show you a little bit how I did this. So the example that I've referred to is the Vitra fire station in Germany, where Zaha Hadid used her conceptual paintings to develop her initial idea of form. And I literally just drew over the painting to create a diagram. I added some arrows, as Graham said, but I also explained the narrative. I tried to analyze the painting rather than just show the painting as it is. And so, same thing, I did the same on the other painting that she used to design her projects, and I explained the concept with some summarized text. And finally, I clearly stated on the page what criteria I was aiming to satisfy with this particular work. And this text actually expands a little bit on what I had already said in the comparative matrix. But if the jury wanted to refer to this page, they can, because the comparative matrix is so constrained with the word count, they can expand a little bit more about how I thought I satisfied the criteria in this particular page. So what I said is that the Vitra fire station is a renowned example of the constructivist architecture, where Zaha Hadid used the site forces to determine the building form through her conceptual paintings. This project is a good example of how the creative application of the fine arts is relevant to design and how it impacts architecture. And this approach was the one I followed to develop the project. I know I'm just stating the obvious, but as Graham said, if you don't state it, if it's not there, then they can't really interpret it. You just need to say what you've done. So again, I just showed how in my own design development, I showed how I followed a similar approach using painting. So there was this painting that I saw that inspired me, and I just explored through my own work. I explored how that painting can be interpreted into form. And then this was the final page. And again, I just stated the obvious just to say that while Zaha Hadid used the site forces to determine the building form through her paintings, I have used the forms of the painting to interpret quiet movement and volumes that will sit on the site. I explored these forces and forms through painting, taking into account the programmatic needs, etc. So just like reiterating again. And I have to say that all of this information, so these are the two final pages that I had. So I showed Zaha Hadid's approach, I analyzed it, and then I showed on the next page how I applied it to my own work. And this page right here, I wanted to just clarify. This was something that I also, there was a whole essay about this that was submitted with this project, and the essay was at the end. And that was the written work that explained these criteria, which Graham said that these are most likely to be covered through written work. So I made sure that every time I included an essay, I made sure that there was a diagram in the portfolio that kind of like summarized the essay. What did I learn from this research that I've done? And so, yeah, I made sure that that was very clear. The other important point of the framework is to try as much as possible to cover the criteria several times. And obviously, this is as you can see, the example that I gave you of my first submission that was unsuccessful. And literally, this was the comment of the jury. Some criteria relied on a sole project citation. This is the feedback that I got when I didn't pass the exam. And yeah, this is critical. Make sure that you cover the criteria several times. It's so important. And unfortunately, this was the only piece of feedback that I got, which you can tell how confusing it is when I failed the first time around. But yeah, this was a big thing. And this is the table that I submitted the second time around. And as you can see, I made sure that criteria were covered at least 3 times. These were a little bit difficult to cover on many projects, but I made sure, nonetheless, that every criteria was covered at least 3 times. And finally, the final point of the framework is to build a strong navigation system. And as Graham said, they have 90 minutes to go through your work, and it's done so quickly. And the easier you make it for them, obviously, to find the information they're looking for, the better. And in this case, I used color coding to help the jury navigate through the work quickly. There are other examples. but as Graham said, it's not the best idea to have all of the criteria in the same page. Just try to make sure that every page relates to the specific criteria that you want to be assessed. Similar thing. So this is a 5-step framework that will hopefully ensure that you have a clear direction when designing your portfolio and not wasting your time second-guessing your decisions. Just before I conclude this presentation, and to ask you if you have any questions, I wanted to show you something that when Graham was talking about the acoustic, I wanted to show you something that relates to that artist house. Try to find. So I found it. Thank you for bearing with me. And it's about this acoustics. I was looking everywhere in my portfolio, and I thought, it's nowhere. What can I do? I need to produce more information. I've got it covered somewhere with the professional work, but that's only like building regulations. That doesn't really show, the thinking behind this. And so I thought, okay, I've got the artist house, and in the artist house, I have a piano room. And that could be a good small example of how to produce something quickly that will cover that criteria. So I literally, in the title, I banged it in, building services, soundproofing, and acoustical treatment of the music room. So I basically just took a precedent, showed what kind of system I wanted to use. I explained a little bit, how acoustics works, and I just wanted to show to the jury that, I understand how this works and what I want to avoid. Then I analyzed the system that I wanted to use, and then I just related it directly to my music room and how I wanted the direct transmission, but I wanted the panels to absorb the sound that it could be otherwise reflected into the room as echo, and therefore just alter the quality of the sound. And so I thought, okay, what do I have in my work that I could do this very quickly and not make it a whole thing? I had the SketchUp model of the house, so I just went inside the room, just black and white with some shading, put a piano there, and then just sketched very quickly how I think those acoustic panels would look. And then, just put a little bit of inspiration since it's piano room, and just put a little bit of reference to the piano. So this is how we can think about the material, because I really wanted to submit the artist house because it had that approach of Zaha Hadid that I really thought that it met those criteria that I wanted to meet with the arts. But then if you can find some ways in some of your projects that you can fill the gaps with some extra material that is quick to produce, then yeah, that's what you need to do. And then finally, again, I explained how I thought this met the criteria. And just to show you, at the end of this, so this was my artist house. This was the whole project that I submitted with the Zaha Hadid approach. And just to show you right at the end, I've got the references, and then I've got the history of art essay. And I just literally just banged it at the end, and then just talked about all of the other influences, and talked about the work of Zaha Hadid. And that diagram that I showed at the beginning just kind of summarizes what I learned from the essay. That's it. Any questions? Yeah.
Just one comment I'd make with that. Really good example. The acoustics example there. What's really important for me, sitting on the examination side, is it's the application. Okay, so if you just pull the theory out of the book and present it on a page, it could come from anywhere. It's the authorship issue. I don't know what you actually know. The really good thing about that example is that Sarah's actually taken and shown her knowledge of it by applying it back into the design work. It's clearly hers. So it just deals with the authorship and the authenticity of what's been presented. So yeah, don't fall into the pitfall of just presenting a couple of representing pages from a book, because then it leaves us with a question about what you actually know. that's a really good example.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it just always pays to show like, what you've learned from the research that you've done and how you applied it to your project. Sorry, did you have a question? Yes? Oh, sorry.
I'm just wondering, so with the essay that you've put in the back, does that count towards your pages of your portfolio?
No.
So that is like a supplement at the back?
Yeah.
What do you call it? Appendix?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an appendix. And I knew the jury were not going to read this, but I put at the beginning of the essay a little summary, and I just put all the criteria that I thought the summary had met. Is that right? Yeah?
So with this project, did you find that you had to kind of post-rationalize, as in like, was Zaha Hadid an actual inspiration at the time, but you just needed to find an example that could tie back in to your project, kind of? Did you find you were doing that quite a bit with your projects?
Yes, I did. And to be fair, at the time, I did get inspiration, not just from Zaha Hadid, but it was actually this drawing. And I kind of like knew this connection of architecture and art and architecture, and how to use representation to like explore the volumes. But when I designed the project, I wasn't referring to Zaha Hadid. But that's why I'm saying, if you have an idea, just look for the material that is readily available, and just try to adapt it. Yeah, and I had to do that quite a lot because I didn't have much. Honestly, I graduated about 11 years ago. I didn't have any material. I didn't have any sketches. I didn't have anything. I had the finished project. I had literally 2 pages for this project, and it was only images. So I had to do a lot of that work retrospectively.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's all right. Yep. All good? Brilliant. Perfect. I wanted to do the exercise now. Are you still sharp? Do you still think you can do